On Law Weekly today, we assess the performance of the judiciary in 2018 from a business perspective. Our guest is Mr. George Etomi, a distinguished transaction lawyer, regularly consulted by multinational companies and top government agencies. We also have a review of some of the major events that shaped the judiciary in 2018. Hello and welcome to the program. I am Shola Shieli. Mr. George Etomi is the pioneer chairman of the Nigerian Bar Association's section on business law. He's also a member of the Body of Benchers, the highest regulatory body of the legal profession in the country. And so he's well placed to assess the performance of this third arm. And this was the first question I put to him.
2018, I would imagine, it was just a year of stability from a judicial standpoint. And if I recall the last time we spoke, we looked at the reforms introduced by the Chief Justice of Nigeria regarding the introduction of IT to ease judicial processes. I now know that the email addresses have been established, and almost every lawyer is now required to have an email address that tied to the Supreme Court, so that service of processes, at least is starting with the Supreme Court, service of processes will, in theory, be a lot easier. And again, if you look at the causes of delays in our courts, they will tell you that nearly 60% is due to this lack of service, proof of service. And that is why every preliminary objection starts with, "My lord, have not been served." Now, with the introduction of the email addresses and services by electronic means, you will remove one major drawback to the judicial process. So that's a very welcome development. Yes. So once that's done, it cascades down to the Court of Appeal. Then eventually we hope that all the other high courts will take it. Of course, as you know, Justice Zana, Borno State CJ, yeah, he's been the one driving this. And I've had the pleasure of talking with him a number of times. And he's very, very pleased at the results. The response too has been phenomenal. The NBA has signed on. And of course, he had so many seminars, workshops to explain what they're trying to do. Again, with Paulo Soro, we have an IT savvy president there now. He would also drive that process forward. So I think the rest of us, lawyers, must take this up, because it's going to form a very effective and potent tool for dealing with delays. So at least if you take away the delays that have to do with manual processes, you can then begin to focus on the real issues of the law. So lawyers don't go there. You're unprepared for a trial and you just simply deny that you've been served. It's so easy for a judge to just sort of look up and through his computer, through his laptop, through whatever, to find that you've been served. So it's a welcome development in 2018. It should be consolidated in 2019. And let's not even forget that as we begin to move towards an election year where there will be a deluge of cases, you must find a way of seeing how delays like this can be eliminated, from simply saying have not been served. Go an alternative means of service. So many of these things will be eliminated.
So that we can focus on the real issue.
Yes, and I just wanted to add also that on the issue of representation, the CJ had actually given some sort of directive that you shouldn't have more than 5 lawyers on a matter. That's come up with some mixed reaction. Some lawyers feel it's an infringement on the fundamental right of a client to counsel and all that. But I think he's also done it to save time. You know, at times you see how many, 200 lawyers, 100 lawyers in enthusiasm representing a particular client, and then at this point where we're doing everything in longhand, you have to really take note of each and every one of them, and if they insist on making submissions, you must go through, even if all they do is to concur with what the lead counsel has said and all that. So it will be interesting to see how that also develops. But one thing we cannot deny is that under Honorable Justice Onogeng, there's a determination to move the judiciary forward, and I like what I see. And if I also look at Lagos State, where we stay, there's also a lot going on. The CJ herself recently introduced reforms. There are still a little bit of cries about filing fees and some of the things that have gone up, but I think most of the times it actually addresses the issue of delays. So there's actually some sort of sanction for lawyers who unnecessarily delay matters. So call it punitive, call it whatever it is. Again, some lawyers say that it could be a deterrent to the ordinary litigator, the not so rich litigator from litigating, or you are visiting the sins of a lawyer on the client. Yeah, I guess those issues should be looked at the merit, but we must not run away from what the focus is, which is to get counsel to be more alive to the duty they owe, not just their client, but the court, to ensure that unnecessary delays do not stand in the way for the effective dispensation of justice. So 2019, I'm hoping that we can begin to get more and more judicial pronouncements that impact or enhance the rights of the citizen, so that way the judiciary then plays the role it is supposed to play to enhance business. Investors want to come in, they want to be clear about what their rights are, and in the case of a litigation, what the outcome could most likely be. Those things form the risk profile. So in the overall context of the ease of doing business, an active judiciary is a sine qua non.
We talked about the judiciary, so let's also talk about the executive. They did a lot of work with the business environment, so much so that the country moved up on the ease of doing business ranking. How well would you say that those reforms have been? How far-reaching would you say they've been?
They're quite far-reaching. If you start, let's start first with the paperwork. There have been improvements on the legislation. The laws have been passed. CAMA has been passed. The new CAMA has been passed. The Corporate Affairs Commission has set up its own rules as well to give effect to the new laws and all that. And I think counsel who generally, right now, you can incorporate a company, you don't even need a lawyer anymore and all that. So right now, you can actually incorporate a company online. That's one of the introductions that have been brought in. So again, you remove the mystery around how companies are formed. It should not be that mysterious. So in that regard, it should be easy for just about anybody to get a company. There are now standard forms, memo, and articles. You can just pick online and just insert any particular clause you want, and you're good to go. So from that point of view, where the executive has done very, very well. And then, of course, under PEBEC as well, the NBA section on business law, who have worked largely with the executive and the NESG, the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, to ensure that all the activities to do with business regulations are given more verve. That's producing and yielding more and more positive results. And in spite of declining oil revenues, we actually see an upswing in inquiries about investment in this country. Many people don't believe it, but those of us who practice business laws know that. But even if you don't look at the mega businesses, if you're looking at the medium to small scale businesses, there's a lot. I think many Nigerians are no longer just sitting down and waiting to get a job. Many of them are actually creating their own jobs. So the one-man company, the small businesses, the medium are all coming together, forming their companies, and they're moving forward. And funny enough, if you work in the circles of a lot of these young entrepreneurs, they're always on the go. How do I do this? How do I get this? NGOs, they are working and doing so many, many, many things. And those are the practical effects of the whole pitch about the ease of doing business. And it's not surprising at all that we've moved up the rankings.
Another area I want us to talk about is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area after agreement. Many people think that it would help, but the fears that some people have expressed that it would turn the country into a dumping ground. How justified do you think those fears are?
Yes, the fears are justified, but in my opinion, not enough for us not to sign. The good thing about the African Continental Free Trade Area, it's like it tries to mimic the European Union. And if you look at the antecedents of the European Union, it actually started with the European, there was an European Economic Union, European Economic Community, which then led into a union. So it was like a graduated stage where you become essentially like one trading bloc. We've been trying to do it in Africa. We've tried it in subsets like ECOWAS, and all of this. But if you look at even the ECOWAS and all other things, apart from perhaps the traveling, the free trade and all that, we've not translated it into the free movement of goods and services across the continent. And that's why when you look back, traveling within the continent, general movement within the continent is a hassle. And so the rich potential that exists, I mean, the African continent the African Continental Free Trade Area probably gives you access to about 1.2 billion people. And not just 1.2 billion people, 1.2 billion very active people within the area. That's what the access it gives to you. So from the point of view of the smaller trading companies, of course it's a booster. That's why it's not surprising that most of them have signed on. And those who up till now have been reluctant are the big ones, Nigeria. But South Africa, that was even away, has now joined. So big brother Nigeria, who, by the way, was the instigator of this whole thing, is holding back because naturally there are objections from manufacturers here that it could lead to dumping, like you correctly said. Some say it could reverse the gains we've done in agriculture. Labor thinks that, you can get, let me say, unskilled labor all over the place and all that. Those are genuine fears, and I know the government is addressing them. In fact, I think there's been a presidential committee that has now been set up to look at these fears. But the preponderance of opinion is that we would gain more than we will lose. And it is really for us to position ourselves. Because once we are able to ratify the agreement and it becomes alive, the truth is that Nigeria boasts of one of the largest workforces you can get anywhere in the world. Just look at the migration patterns. You go to Europe, you go to the EU, you go to the Middle East, our professionals, everywhere and all that. I don't see why we cannot do that within the continent. Would we get other people coming this way? I don't see why not. I don't think Nigeria has ever been afraid of competition. If anything else, people will be more afraid about you swallowing them. But hopefully, once the presidential committee comes up with their report, and I hope that report looks favorably at Nigeria's ratification of the agreement, I think we'll begin to address the issues. Because if you don't enter into the field of play, just like with globalization, you just won't know what to avoid and what to do. But in the overall scheme of things, it will be an interesting thing to see what 2019 holds for Africa. I hope that's the year it comes into effect. 2019
is also an election year, so let's round up with talking about 2019. What is the role that you expect the judiciary to play in the election year?
I expect the judiciary to be a frontier for justice, fairness. You can't stop politicians from doing what they should not do. They will try to stretch the rules. They will do whatever they like. But for the sake of the system, for the sake of the individual and for the sake of justice, the judiciary must stand up and do what is right. I do not advocate judicial legislation. No, they should not go beyond what the laws that exist, but simply interpreting the laws that exist correctly would be enough. Because once that's there and whatnot, it's just a question of time. The politicians will fall in line.